Good evening. I'd like to call the March 8th, 2018 Board of Finance public hearing of the fiscal year 2018-2019 budget to order. First and foremost, I want to welcome everybody here tonight, both at home, who will be watching this eventually, as well as the audience. That includes numerous categories of town officials, department heads, board and commission members, town staff, Board of Ed members, Guilford Public School staff and administrators, media, I believe, and of course, members of the Guilford community. Thank you for coming out and joining us tonight. There is no real formal agenda for the public hearing. However, I am going to set up an informal one so we all know the order of how everything will go this evening, so it's clear. So this is how the hearing will proceed this evening. There will be a presentation of the fiscal year 2018-2019 school budget by the Board of Education. I believe Chairman Bloss and Superintendent Freeman will be providing that presentation. We will then entertain questions from the public on the Board of Education budget. I'm only going to mention this once, but this is just a reminder to please recall that these proceedings are taped. And we would like everyone to come up, if you provide any questions or comments, to come up to the podium, state your name and address, and try to keep the comments limited to 3 minutes or less. There will then be a presentation of the fiscal year 2018-19 town budget, which will be done by First Selectman Matt Hoey. We will then do the same thing. We will entertain questions from the public on the town budget. We will then, I will then briefly describe and discuss what the bonded project questions will be to be voted on at the referendum. We will entertain questions on those as well. And then we will have questions from the Board of Finance that will be specific to the Board of Education. We will do the same for the town. And then there will be a summary of the current figures and facts that we've all heard tonight, including some comments that we feel are important to share regarding the grand list and revaluation. There will then be public forum, and at that point in the hearing, we would ask that those speaking please refrain from asking questions or engaging in discussion, as there will already been a time to do that, and keep the comments limited to 3 minutes or less so we can try to keep the meeting somewhat efficient and get out of here before 11. Only kidding. It usually doesn't last till 11. At that point, we will then adjourn after public forum, and we will reconvene at 7:30 on Thursday evening, cross your fingers, weather permitting, which should be fine by then, for the Board of Finance budget workshop, where there will be public forum before and after our discussions and deliberations and possible questions, which there normally are, of the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen in the town. That we will likely move forward with an approved budget to the annual town budget meeting on April 3rd and the subsequent annual budget referendum on April 10th. If we do not do that on Thursday, it will be intended that there is a second alternate Board of Finance workshop that would be scheduled same time, same place, Monday, March 12th. With that, those are the ground rules for this evening, and I would like to invite on behalf of the Board of Education, Dr. Freeman and Chairman Bloss, to provide I believe both presentations will probably be a little bit briefer than they were for the February 15th, but if not, a good summary of the both the Board of Education and town budgets, and the Board of Ed, of course, will be coming first. So, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. First of all, let me answer everybody's most important question this evening. We have not decided about school yet tomorrow. We're going to wait and see what the weather looks like. It's still a little bit uncertain, so Dr. Freeman will be on top of that at 4 in the morning. Anybody who wants to join him for a walk around the green at 4 in the morning, you're invited. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We're going to start off just and try to run through this fairly quickly. It'll take about 10 minutes, I think, just where we are in our current budget and also some of the value that we have received for the budget, because we think that is an important part of the calculus of not only for this board but for the public in looking at our budget.
Thank you, Mr. Bloss. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My portion of the presentation tonight will be to briefly set the context for this presentation. Without going into detail on any of this next series of slides, I will simply remind the community that we take budget building very seriously. We understand and recognize that a budget document is a values document, and that every decision around every dollar that we make impacts the students who come into our schools and the broader community in which our schools sit. We build our budget on top of a vision and a mission that this Board of Ed have approved and that this community has been familiar with. From the vision and the mission, we build upon a series of priorities that this board has set annually for our schools. Currently, our priorities speak first to the educational environment that we strive to create, to the professional environment that we know is necessary if our teachers are to create those learning opportunities that we expect for our students, and finally on the actual community and environment itself, a place where students are both physically and emotionally safe every single day. As we move specifically into the budget build, we then move to a series of budget assumptions, and I will just briefly touch on these. Every single decision we make is run through these assumptions, that first and foremost, every decision goes to make these schools physically and emotionally safe. That second, we are focused intently on learning for our students. Every decision we make is a decision to move learning and student performance forward. That third, we look to every single child. Decisions should touch every child in our schools. And finally, that we will not ask for a new resource before we have explored every existing resource and attempted every possible creativity before asking for a new dollar. We repurpose positions, we repurpose personnel, we jettison old work before adding new work because we understand the importance of the fiscal investment. And then finally, we look to our enrollment. We only budget for the students who we know are going to enter our schools. Projecting forward to next year, we are expecting to see a slight decline in our enrollment, 72 students overall. That would be 72 students fewer next year than we have in our classrooms this year, spread across 7 buildings and 13 grade levels. And to put that in some context, if we go to the next slide, some time ago we went out and we commissioned an enrollment projection. We knew that suburban and affluent communities around the state were seeing enrollment declines. And until school year 13-14, we were experiencing the same declines that other suburban communities around the state of Connecticut were seeing. And in school year 13-14, from that point forward, we began to plateau. Our enrollment began to level out. And while we are projecting a slight decline this year, if you'd click again, Linda, it doesn't match what that demographic study projected for us. The demographic study that we commissioned some time ago, and this was done in association with the new high school bill that was required, that demographic study projected that we should be at 3,100 students this year. And in fact, we're actually sitting very close to 3,300 students. And while we're projecting a decline next year, we don't actually go down as much as we ever project. I expect that our actual enrollment will be slightly above the 3,300 mark. So our enrollment has stopped the decline that other suburban communities are continuing to see and the continued decline that we expected to see. All of that being said then, this is the Board of Education's approved budget. This is our request moving forward to the community. A request of $59,747,157 to provide the education to the students of Guilford this year. That's an increase of approximately $1.1 million over the existing budget, or 1.87%. To put that in context, the historical increases that you've seen are here. When I talked about the budget assumptions, and when I mentioned how we do not ask for a new resource before looking at existing resources, we begin by looking at efficiencies. This budget recognizes a series of efficiencies. First, I want to mention salaries. Approximately 85% of our budget is made up of salaries and associated benefits for our employees. Education is a people-intensive business. Our budget goes to the teachers in the classrooms, the principals in the buildings, the custodians in the hallways, the cooks and the servers in the kitchens, and the secretaries and clerical support positions, administrative support positions in our offices. By restructuring FTEs, by hiring effectively, and over the last several years, by negotiating thoughtfully with our unions and associations, this Board of Education has worked to keep down the costs of those salaries and the associated benefits. In the last series of contracts, this Board of Education has moved all of our contracted employees into high-deductible health savings accounts, where we recognized last year a savings of approximately $500,000 in our insurance costs. I also want to note that our tuition line, while we are a public school system, we do spend tuition dollars for students whose needs we can't meet locally. Special education students, students with special needs who we send out to more specialized locations to receive their education. Over the last 4 years, we have been committed to growing our capacity to keep more of those students at home, and the reality then is that we have seen a reduced cost or avoided costs in that tuition line moving forward. And all of our principals, all of our classroom teachers have worked very hard to keep the costs of supplies and materials at the building and classroom level down. To give you a little bit of an illustration of what that looks like, I know that this is a difficult chart to follow, but Mr. Hoey asks to see it every year. This plots both our budgeted and actual special education spending. The line in red is the more important line to look at. That is our actual special education spending in the areas of tuition, transportation, and special contracted services. And what I want to draw your attention to is that the budgeted amount for this year in that line item is below the budgeted amount in 2012-2013. So special education is an incredibly volatile line. It is difficult to know year from year how much is going to be needed because students come to our district from other places and students develop needs over time. So you can see how hard it is to predict by looking at the blue budgeted line. But when you look at our actual spend, you will recognize that the work we have done over those several years has brought this year's budgeted dollar amount to below the 12-13 amount in the same areas. And if you click one more time, Linda, if you think about avoided costs, if you think about where our costs would have been if we continued the trajectory that we were setting in 2010, 2011, and 2012, you will see that we have brought those costs to be much more under control. And more importantly to me, we're servicing those students better. And a second illustration, if you just move forward one more, Linda, in the areas, I mentioned supplies and materials. If you look at our budget by location, so if you look at our schools as locations, if you look at special education expenditures or our technology lines, you will see that in many areas we're seeing declines. You're seeing decreased spending at our high school of over 7%. You're seeing decreased spending at Cox Elementary School of over 6%, decreased spending in our technology line of over 2.5%, because we're working very, very diligently in those areas to keep costs down. I will note that LEAT is an exception with a slight increase of almost 3%, because we've actually seen enrollment increases in LEAT specifically in the 3rd grade. And so that small increase is to keep pace with their slightly growing enrollment. Once we've worked with every single efficiency, however, we also have to recognize that there are unavoidable cost increases that come with running a school system. And so while I noted that I recognize salaries as an area of efficiency, when it represents 80% of our, or 85% of our budget, even a small percent increase is going to recognize a real dollar increase. So our salaries are increasing by $450,000 this year. We are contracted with 5 different bargaining units, and those are contractual increases that we are bound to. We've got a medical increase, medical benefits of over $400,000. We have a transportation increase of over $200,000, and I want to spend just a minute and make sure that I make that very clear. We are required to provide school bus service for every student who lives in Guilford and attends the Guilford Public Schools. It is a statutorily required service. For the last 5 years, we have had an incredibly positive contract with our bus vendor in our favor. Over the last 5 years, the cost of our bus transportation fell below market value. But when that contract sunsetted this year and we bid it publicly to every transportation company in the state of Connecticut, the responses that we got initially came back with a 20% increase. We met with the bidding companies, we rejected their first bids, we asked for second responses to that bid, and the increase we got is close to a 15% increase ultimately. But that's just a market correction. That simply is accounting for the monies we saved over the last 5 years. The companies aren't gouging us, they're not making a fortune, they're charging us what our neighboring communities have been paying for the last 2, 3, and 4 years while we benefited from an incredibly positive contract. But it's a significant increase, it is a statutorily required service, and it becomes one of our cost drivers this year. And special education services. While special education spending overall is down, by keeping students with greater or more complex needs in district, we have to sometimes contract in from experts, and so we're spending a little bit more on those expert contracts to keep the greater costs of tuitions down. These 4 line items alone represent a $1.3 million increase. And I want to remind you that the total budget is only increasing by slightly below 1.1 million. We have found other efficiencies to attempt to offset these 4 cost centers, but these are unavoidable cost increases. In addition to looking at every single efficiency that we can find, in addition to recognizing the unavoidable cost increases of doing business on a daily basis, I believe that it's our job to improve education in this community every single year as well. We have never presented a budget to this community that simply stays still. Every year, one of our budget assumptions is to improve services for every child in the school district. And so every year, we look at what we believe are necessary investments. There are investments this year. There are improvements. I will be the first to say that they are modest. These are not bold enhancements, and these are not expensive enhancements. First, we're going to continue the support of the work that we've already begun. We're going to continue the support of coaching teachers in the classrooms because that makes them more effective and impactful. We're going to continue to support the International Baccalaureate program that we have launched, and we're going to continue to build our capacity in special education because it's right for our students. It also helps to bring down the overall cost. In addition to those continued investments, we are looking for a modest increase in music staffing this year. We're asking for 2 additional elementary music teachers so that we can bring the music contact time at our elementary schools up to the state average. Right now, our students currently receive less than the state average in music contact in grades K through 4. And we're looking for some modest increases to assistant coaching positions. One illustration, we have a crew team in which 88 students participate on Lake Quanapog, and we don't have a single assistant coach. Currently, we collect donations to afford to fund that assistant coach who goes out there to help those students every day. We believe that's an important program. We believe that's a safety issue. So we're looking at crew and possibly some other locations for modest increases to assistant athletic coaching positions. And then finally, this is not part of our operating budget, but we do have a capital bonding request going forward this year as well. We will be requesting a $3.6 million bond for the purposes of improving the heating and ventilation and air conditioning systems at both Baldwin Middle School and Melissa Jones School. The system at Baldwin is currently the original system that was built with the building in the 70s. It failed catastrophically last winter. It failed not quite as catastrophically already this winter. We're keeping it going with simply our maintenance crews and contracted services. It's time to replace that system so that the building is cared for properly. Melissa Jones, while it is a much smaller project, is having similar heating and ventilation concerns. We see both of those as necessary improvements if we're going to continue to have students in those buildings. So this would be our capital bond request. The summary for staffing, again, as I mentioned, modest increases. While we are looking to increase elementary music by 2 positions and by 1 classroom position, that's for the 3rd grade that I mentioned at LEAT, we're also reducing a classroom position at the elementary level. We anticipate it will fall at either the kindergarten or at the 1st grade level, depending on what our kindergarten enrollment looks like. And we're looking to add half a paraprofessional position this year. No administrative increases, no custodial increases are part of the Board of Education budget that we present before you this year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bloss.
So one of the things we try to do on the Board of Education is we try to make decisions based on costs and weighing costs and benefits. We recently received some data from the state of Connecticut that gives us a little bit of an idea about how we're doing. Now we're not, and I'm going to present this as what it is. This is an objective measurement of our district's performance compared to other districts in the state of Connecticut. We were judged, on these 12 factors by the state of Connecticut, and they put together a report. And it's called the Next Generation Accountability Report for this year, 2016-17. This is the pre-K, or the K through 12 districts in the state of Connecticut. We are not ranked 21 to 25. We are not here. We're not at the next one either. There's some good districts here. Trumbull, Simsbury, Fairfield. But look at where Guilford is. At $3,000 less per student, more than $3,000 than the schools ahead of us. We are fourth in the state of Connecticut, even though demographically we are in the high 20s in terms of just our demographic ranking. Now, where does our cost stand in terms of comparing to some other comparable districts? The data is from the municipal fiscal indicators put out by the Office of Policy and Management. We are the 49th most populous town in the state. Our per capita income is moving up, interestingly. It's up four places in the last year, and our median household income is 38th in the state. Unemployment is very low in Guilford. Our equalized mill rate is going down, and equalized means that it takes into account revaluation. Our adjusted tax levy per capita is 32nd, which is lower than our town wealth. Our net grand list per capita is 35th. And how about that? Net current expenditures per pupil, 78th in the state of Connecticut. Last year it was 73rd. So that's the performance. Those are the results that we're getting because of the dedication of our faculty and our administrators and our students and our parents. This is the third year in a row now that our request is below the rate of inflation. Other towns there are several other towns that are above us. I just saw New Haven actually is proposing a 10% increase, which I don't think is necessarily likely to pass, but that is not something that the Board of Education brought to you here. And what if you don't have kids in school? Now, obviously a lot of people don't, but the data shows that home values, home prices are based in large part on the quality of a school district. We can just go through this quickly. We want to obviously get to the public questions. But I'll just summarize it. Study after study tells you that one of the most important drivers of home values is, in fact, the quality of the school district. So in short, we understand that education is expensive. This is an expensive proposition to educate 3,300 kids to the quality that we want them educated. Instruction is important. Quality instruction is not cheap. But we believe that we continue to provide a very reasonable return on the investment that we've asked the community to make, and we're grateful for the opportunity to continue doing that. If you want to get more data, more information, our website, of course, our budget is on the website, and then there are some links to some of these other reports that I've highlighted here. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we'll be, after Mr. Hoey proceeds, we'll be happy to take any questions. Or do you want us to do it now?
Well, what I've learned when you become chairman is you can kind of flip the agenda a little bit if you want to. And I'd like to ask, actually, the Board of Finance, what we could do to be a little bit more efficient here. When I set up my informal agenda here is maybe we could open it up to the public and then have the Board of Finance ask questions so you're all up here at the same time, and then have the town come up. Sure. This way we do everything with the Board of Education first. I think it's a little bit more efficient. So at this point, I'd like to ask anybody from the public who has any questions regarding the Board of Education budget that was presented to step up and feel free to ask away. Come on up. Yep. Questions, comments, questions or comments are fine.
Hello, My name is Maria Krish, a resident of 58 Trailwood Drive in Guildford. And this is a comment more than a question. But I just wanted to come from the perspective of maybe one of the new residents of Guildford and maybe commenting on one of the last slides that was just shown. My family made the decision to move to Guildford in this past August. My son is in a kindergarten at Calvin Leet. And I have to say that the single most deciding factor for us in terms of deciding a town to live in this general area was the school system. And because we have a son who's just starting in the school system, we've met a lot of other parents who've also moved here recently. And I know I can say with certainty that we're not alone in making that decision. I think that one of the big benefits, as pointed out, of having a strong school system is it does draw people to the community. And I'm very happy to see sort of continued support for the schools and hope that that is supported. So.
Thank you, Maria.
Good evening. I'm Lindsay Gilberto. I'm a resident of 121 Bill Rogers Drive. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of 55 families from Calvin Leet School who strongly support the superintendent's budget and its expansion of the elementary music program. Last month, many of us attended a concert at Leet given by 3rd and 4th grade students under the direction of our wonderful part-time music teacher, Ms. Libby Steidner. We wish you could have been there to hear the music and to see the pride on our children's faces as they performed. Our kids love the arts, and frankly, 30 minutes per week of music is just not enough of them for them to receive the full benefits of a comprehensive music education. According to multiple scientific studies, music instruction enhances all areas of a student's education, including reading, mathematics, and even school attendance. These are benefits that all elementary students should receive, and not just those who have the resources to supplement their 30 minutes of in-school instruction with after-school lessons. We thank the superintendent for prioritizing music education in his budget and hope we can count on the support of the Board of Finance as well with this initiative. This is signed by all the... Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Hi, Jeremy Jackson. I'm at 178 Lovers Lane. I have 2 children in the Guildford school, both at Calvin Leet. And I'm here tonight representing 36 families of the Calvin Leet School who are strongly supportive of the superintendent's budget proposal, particularly in the addition of the 3rd, 4th grade teacher for our school next year. It has been noted that previous Board of Finance and Board of Education meetings that our children's 3rd grade classes are the biggest of the district, magnifying which has behavioral challenges and stretching our wonderful teaching staff to their limits. By adding a 3rd class for this group next year, we can improve their classroom experience and better support each child's individual needs. I would like to thank Dr. Freeman and, of course, our principal, Bill Grimm, for requesting additional support for our students and prioritizing them in next year's budget. We hope we can count on the continued support of the Board of Finance as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It seems as if we're getting the public forum and the comments out of the way first, so that's okay.
Hi, I'm Lorna Steele. I live at 112 Manor Road, and my comment is not about what is in the budget, but what is once again missing from the budget, and that is there are $0 allotted to moving our high school start time to a healthy start for yet another school year. The health and safety of our students was the first thing in the assumptions of the budget presentation, and in a lot of ways, I think our school district does come through for our students. There's support that our students have that they might not have in other districts, but what they don't have is a healthy high school start time. 8:30 is the recommended start time by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I could list numerous healthcare organizations that also list 8:30 as a start time. The district has been working on this for 4 years. It's time that we join, the start time that we should have, and I just want to verbalize extreme disappointment that no money whatsoever has been allotted to finally making that change. I don't even see actually any no-cost options that have been taken advantage of. Thanks.
You want me to respond to this?
I was going to ask if the Board of Education would like to respond to that. Yeah.
There are no additional dollars in this proposed budget for changing start time. We did look at an alternative last year, as this board knows, that would have required going to 2 waves of buses that would have added under the bus costs in the last contract. It was a range of at a minimum of $500,000 and a maximum of $800,000, and that was under the old contract. Since then, we've got a new contract that's about 20% higher. So there is a financial way that it could be done. It would require going to 2 bus waves at some cost of, let's say, $750,000. There is, I was at a start time committee meeting. Dr. Freeman appointed a committee 3 or 4 months ago, I think, when we were starting to work through into this again, and I was at that meeting earlier. There is still a significant possibility that that committee is going to make a recommendation to the board as to a somewhat later start time that would be cost neutral. But we're continuing to work very, very hard on that. We do have a new bus company. That bus company committed to trying to take a look at whether there are any obvious route changes or transportation changes that might allow us to start later. So it is not an issue that has been shut down. It's not an issue that is not still being examined. I know Dr. Moore, when he left the Board of Education, agreed to chair this committee, and so it is still something that we are working very hard on.
If I could, is there any timeline in terms of when that recommendation or suggestion may come up?
The hope would be that if there is a no-cost recommendation for the year 18-19, that would be communicated to parents sometime in the month of May. I mean, legally, technically, we could do it over the summer, but that seems like a really bad idea. So our hope would be to try to communicate that as best we can during May, recognizing that there is a lot of work still to do with the new bus company.
Thank you. Yes, if it's a question, yes.
I read that you have to notify the teachers union if there is a change in start time.
It's not an issue. Contractually, it's not an issue. No, the question was just for the purpose of the TV.
Thank you.
Michael, yeah, get the thumbs up from Mike. That's great. The question was whether there was a contractual limitation on informing the teachers on any changes in start times, and the answer to that is no. It's not a contractual limitation.
Thank you.
And I should say, by the way, Regina Sullivan, the chair of the teachers union, is on this committee along with some other faculty at the high school, and Ms. Sullivan has been a very valuable and has contributed a great deal in offering the perspective of the faculty. And I just want to publicly acknowledge the work that she's done. It's not part of her job description, and she is working very hard on this issue as well.
Thank you. Any other questions and/or comments from the public? Yeah.
I only have 3 minutes here, and yes, it's Mark Tampson. I'm at 627 Towner Swamp Road. I've been a resident of Guilford for the past 10 years. I'm a disgruntled taxpayer. I feel that all the increases that come in every year, they just keep coming, they keep coming. I don't know if the Board of Finance wants to make the hard decisions to send this stuff back. I look at this thing here, I see the line items, I see where the $1 million in the education budget went. Again, I only have 3.5 minutes, but everybody, department heads, all gave themselves raises, and $100,000 for the police, $100,000 for the firemen. But I'm looking at let me put my glasses on. You guys should be looking at these line items here. Never mind the increase. I see $1.5 million in increases, and I'm assuming the line items are all good. So my question is, $456,000 on employee benefits on the school side. Geez, in the private sector, the CEOs are always looking to get cheaper medical plans. So I don't know what you're doing with that. So again, I think you should send it back. I'm one of them guys that believes in zero budget increases. I mean, you're at 1.87%, and everything's about the schools, the kids, you know, that's all it is. We're at $16,000 per kid, and the same. You're talking about Darien, New Canaan, and Greenwich. You're up there with those guys. I mean, like, wow, those are the richest people in the state down there. So you're spending top dollar for these kids, and I'm not saying kids aren't important, but the bottom line is you're always taxing the poor guys, and I can't believe the people ain't down here. You know that they're not pounding their fists here every year, $300, $400, $500. You know, I started out at $8,000. Now I'm at $13,000, and all these increases, they stay with you for the rest of your life. It's not like they go away; they go backwards. You got less people, and you got more teachers. I mean, so I'm not here to point fingers, but you guys are the stopping point, and we as a public have one quorum right here to come in and question department heads. So I'm going to go back to my house and put my feet up on the couch and watch my programs. I really didn't want to come down here, but I felt I needed to represent those portions of the people that don't come out and speak against and are tired of the tax increases. So, guys, look at the line items, question these department heads, and I know the kids are everything. It's all about the kids. Look, these people come up. I represent 30 this, 30 that. God bless you, but you're spending a lot of money. The increases keep coming, and that's all I got to say.
I do want to thank you for coming out tonight. Very much appreciate your comments. I know that there was a question in there, and I don't know if there's any other comments you want to make, but the school benefits had directly, the $456,000 directly relates
Yes.
to the Board of Education.
Yeah, I appreciate the question as well, and I hope you understand that I understand the question and the concern associated with it. I do want to respond to the question about the medical increase, but first I'd also like to remind folks what those slides that Mr. Bloss shared show. We are sitting with Darien and New Canaan and Greenwich when you look at our performance. We are fourth in the state when you look at our performance. When you look at the investment per student, we are 78th in the state. Please recognize that those school districts with whom we compete are spending far more than we're spending to get those results. But specifically to the question about the more than $400,000 increase in those medical costs, I want to remind the community that the Board of Education has renegotiated all of the bargaining association contracts in this school system, and we have shifted medical benefits for every single one of those groups away from a point of service program to a high deductible health insurance plan, lowering the costs of those plans. We've moved 4 of our units into high cost deductible plans and 1 unit who is self-funding their own health insurance. By doing that, by making those changes, we reduced the cost of health medical benefits last year by over $500,000. So even with this year's increase, you are spending less on medical insurance for the teachers and employees of the school district in next year's budget than you were in last year's budget. We are working hard to keep the costs of those medical benefits down. We make every effort to keep costs down, but remember the cost of inflation this year was over 2%, and our budget increase is 1.87. So I appreciate the concern, but it's really hard to continue to provide that quality product without absorbing some kind of cost increase annually. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from the public before I open it up to the board? Okay. Colleagues?
I have one.
Go ahead, Veronica.
Dr. Freeman, you talked in your slide presentation about bus transportation and that the state is contractually, we're obligated to provide transportation for every student by the general statutes.
Yes.
Is it possible for parents to opt out? My question leads me that there are, especially the older children at the high school that drive to school, you know, buses are still going to their homes, or do they have to? Can parents opt out?
So it's a really good question, but the answer is no, they cannot. Students cannot sign away their right to transportation as part of their free and appropriate public education. However, what we have done is we have in the scheduling of the routes themselves and in the loading of the buses, we have statistically taken that into account. So at the high school, where we know that somewhere over 40% of our population either drives or is driven to school, our buses pass through every community, every neighborhood in our community. They stop locally for every home, but they don't stop at every doorstep. So we're not stopping at the door of a student who chooses to drive. We are stopping within a mile of every home of every student, so that if those students decided to take the bus tomorrow, that bus would be there and they'd be able to access that required transportation. Additionally, though, we overload the buses at the high school. A bus could probably seat approximately 50 high school students. We program the buses for 65 or 70 students, knowing that all of them never get on any one given day. If there was ever one day in Guilford that all of our high school students expected to ride the bus, we wouldn't be able to seat them. So while we can't individually allow students to sign away that right, we have tried to statistically take advantage of that and bring that down. Our high school bus run runs 6 fewer buses than our middle school bus run to take account of those students that we know do not ride the bus.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about tuition. It's always a very strong, it's a legal requirement, it's a moral requirement, I agree, and I know that you've improved the numbers of students that whose problem areas are dealt with internally. But I wondered what the plans were at the Board of Education for extending the internal capabilities in special ed so that we could reduce the outsourcing of some of our students to very high cost, independent or public, private, whatever they are, institutions.
So in this last budget cycle, in the current school year in which we sit, we placed the last block in place. Some 4 years ago, we began building that internal capacity, and we started at the two ends. We began looking at our youngest students and meeting their needs in preschool and then at the elementary level, and we created an alternatively scheduled high school. This last year, we just placed the last block at Adams Middle School, so that for the first time in this school year, we have a pre-K through age 21 continuum where we can meet the needs of those students. For students who are 18 to 21, while it remains a public requirement for us to provide their education, we work collaboratively with Madison and Clinton in a program that the three communities have come together to create. So we continue to move in exactly that direction. In the last year or two, we have for the first time actually been able to charge tuition to some of our neighboring communities in very small numbers because we have now created the capacity to meet the needs of students. Some of our neighboring schools can't meet that need, and we have actually brought in some students and charged tuition to outside communities. We have no intention of turning this into a money-making venture, but that speaks to the level of capacity that we've been able to build. And now, as we have the full continuum in place, we will never eliminate outplacements. Children are unique. There are always going to be needs that we may not be able to meet in-house, but I expect we'll continue to see those needs decrease until they level at a significantly lower spot.
So where is the tuition in the coming budget as opposed to the existing budget?
We are expecting to have a decline in this year's enrollment. Over the last 3 years, we have cut outplacements by roughly half.
Just to follow up on that. So the tuition line has gone down, I think, about 13% in this budget, if I'm not mistaken.
13.9.
And is that also, in addition to the increase in the capacity, is it solely based on capacity, or is it some of the aging out of the population that you have?
It's both. So while we have created a greater capacity in-house to meet the needs of those students, some of our older students who were receiving outplaced services are beginning to age out and graduate out of our system, and we have not placed younger students out to continue to maintain those numbers. So we're keeping some of the younger folks in while we're beginning to age out some of the students who were already receiving those services before we had the local capacity.
And just to follow up on that, it's also a kind of a volatile element of the budget. So if the numbers aren't the 13% reduction, where would you see, how would you compensate if a family were to move into town or a child who's already in the system were diagnosed and needed to be outsourced? What impact would that have?
That is exactly the reason for the volatility in the chart that we showed you. We are a school district of approximately 3,300 students, and special education makes up somewhere between 10 and 12% of our population annually. It becomes a very small number, and some of those outplacements can be very large dollar amounts. And so if we have a family who moves into the community mid-year and their student has special education needs, or if we have a child who develops needs in the middle of a school year that were previously unidentified, we are required morally and legally to meet the needs of those students. We find the way to do that within the existing budget. This board, in no one's recent memory, has ever come back to the Board of Finance to request a special appropriation to meet those concerns. One of the other things the chart showed you, I didn't draw attention to this, but in 5 of the last 6 years, real special education expenditures were above the budgeted amount. Once our budget is approved, we find ways to work within that budget and to assume those unanticipated costs when they occur. They've occurred every year in 5 out of the last 6 years. We find a way to meet the needs.
Go ahead, John.
I think I want to ride on this conversation, this discussion, because I just want to commend you again, as I did many times years before when I was on the board. I think this approach of bringing the special education in-house is working, and I think it's a long-term approach that really goes to efficiency for the way the town is run and the way we're handling that. And as I understood it from the previous years, we really were offering an in-house service that people preferred over outplacements. So I really commend your activity there, but I do want to ask a little cutting edge question though. I know a few years ago when I was on the board, I was curious, were we really saving money from the in-house program? There was a couple of years where we weren't getting the savings we were looking for, and I was wondering if we really were. So I guess the question is, that graph we see where it is coming back down, is that mostly from students aging out, or have you really calculated a savings from the in-house efforts?
No, it's a combination, but we think a very substantial part of it is because of the in-house programs, because the cost of some of the outplacements is I mean, we've talked about this at some of the Board of Finance meetings. There are outplacements that are extraordinarily expensive. Now, the state of Connecticut is supposed to reimburse us dollar for everything above 4.5 times our cost, our per student cost. They don't. This year it's going to be somewhere in the high 60s or around 70% that they're going to reimburse of just that excess part. So when you get into some of these very high needs students, the outplacements can be very, very expensive. We believe that we've saved significant money by adding staff. Now, you can't just take a student that was outplaced and then bring him or her back into a regular education classroom with no para. It's not that choice. The choice is whether you bring them into an in-house program with special staff, but less expensive special staff than a 6-figure outplacement.
I wonder if that graph might have a line that shows students aging out, so you can kind of see if the curve of who's aging out, where we're saving from the in-house.
I mean, we could certainly run the numbers and provide those to you. We do need to recognize that when you're talking about numbers that are as small as our special education population, we need to be careful in a public setting that those individual numbers become individually identifiable as we don't talk about specific students in public settings. But to the question, Jonathan, the fact that students are aging out and not being replaced by younger students going out, that is the reason for the savings. But were it not for the local capacity, the students who are aging out would just be replaced by 3, 5, and 6-year-olds coming up behind them, and that is happening at a slower rate than it had been before we built the local capacity.
Because some of the programs are targeted for the younger students, is that?
Yes.
Okay, understood.
Right. And I should say, this is not just a cost efficiency program. The parents of these kids love this program. And think about why. Would you rather have your child on a bus for an hour going up to Windsor or going up to somewhere else, an hour one way? Or would you rather have your child with Guilford kids in Guilford with a 5-minute bus ride, having local teachers? So it is. I don't say it's a win-win very often because I don't think there's too many things that really win-wins. This is a win-win.
This is the kind of efficiency that taxpayers are looking for. So my hat is off to you for this kind of effort. I wonder if I can keep going with a couple of more questions.
While we're on it. Are any of the residential students aging out?
Residential? Or outplacements?
Yeah.
Yes, outplacements. There are some outplacements aging out.
No, are any of the residential outplacements aging out? We have a very few number of them. That's the highest cost. Are any of those aging out?
Yes, I believe they are.
Do you know how many?
It's not a number that I would want to discuss in a public forum like this.
Okay.
But it's not a very big number, the total.
I know how many there are in it, so I understand.
Jonathan. So I think this is going to be some clarification, really, and I'm just trying to figure out about new hiring. And in the list of new hires, we had some music teachers, which I think is a good value. And as you said, that's going to kind of get us back in line with where the state is with, what did you call it, time in music for students?
Well, average time around
time.
Districts.
But I'm also wondering, I didn't see, are you still planning on hiring a recess coordinator?
Yes.
Still going to be in the
budget.
Those were classroom positions that were up there.
Okay, so that's still going to be an ad. And then I've had some confusion that, I have been trying to communicate with you, but we haven't ironed it out yet about the custodial lines. And I probably have maybe just an old document. Maybe there was an update, but it looked like we were going to add 1.5 new positions under the custodial line.
No, that was last year. Last year we added 3 half-time positions, and that was in the 17-18 budget. It is now in this budget, just as continued from 17-18. Those are not new positions. There are no new custodial hires.
Okay, so is it half year we picked them up, or why
no,
is there,
it was at the beginning of the year, but they were half-time positions. We hired as 0.5 FTEs so that there aren't health benefits, frankly.
So I'm still confused. Why do we have 1.5 new positions this year and another, $68,000 or so in that on those salary lines?
Those 3 half-time positions were approved last year. We did not fill them all immediately. We staggered the fill as we monitored the budget position at the state.
So they were approved last year.
They were approved last year.
They're hitting this year.
They were in the budget last year,
They were in the budget, but we didn't fill them all immediately. We filled one immediately, one halfway through the year, and one may still be unfilled. We were monitoring the state budget position.
Okay, and there was another line item. I know you're going to add some one assistant crew coach for about $3,000,
right,
which seems like a bargain, actually. But then I see that line item increasing by $15,000.
Part of that's an accounting issue. Part of it is that we need to put in the budget some of the assistant coach positions that are paid for by booster clubs or by contributions, and then specifically we didn't get the level of reimbursement from booster clubs in this year's budget as we thought we were going to get, so we reflected that in next year's budget. Okay. So they aren't new hires, and we have a very cooperative relationship with the booster clubs. I think we're going to try to actually at an operations committee meeting talk about some of the financial support that some of the parent groups, and not only parent groups but booster groups make in swimming and hockey and football and baseball and lacrosse and several other sports. It's an interesting. We have this discussion every year at the Board of Ed as to whether to go to a pay-to-play model and have a student participation fee. And we're skeptical whether that would really lead to much value given the amount that people already contribute, and would that lead to parents not contributing through the booster clubs at the same level? It's an interesting question, and we do get a lot of support from the booster clubs.
Okay, understood. And then, I'll just make a comment. When I attended some of your meetings and I saw some outcry for the assistant coaching, I did feel like a little bit of money was going a long way from the feedback that we got, so.
Yeah, you were at our meetings, and everybody who was at our meetings asked for additions to the budget. Yep. Some of them we were able to approve, and some of them we just can't do it this year.
Understood.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit pause for the Board of Ed. I think what we should do is probably bring the town up, provide the presentation, go through the same order, and then we can always, if there's still questions we have for the Board of Education or for the town, we can raise those afterwards.
Good evening. It is my distinct pleasure to present the Town of Guilford's budget for 2018-2019 on behalf of the employees of the Town of Guilford, department heads, and the Board of Selectmen. I just want to note that this budget is being presented to you as a result of a unanimous vote of the Board of Selectmen. We had some pretty healthy discussions. We had some disagreements, but we did arrive at a consensus, and this budget represents what we feel the town needs to continue to provide the level of services which our citizens have come to expect from their town government. As I'm sure most of you are aware, we provide a variety of different types of services, from public protection and safety, maintaining the infrastructure in our community, and some specialized programs, town services, elderly tax relief, youth and family services, senior services, social services, and that like. Some that we call quality of life services, the library, park and rec, our beaches and our lakes, as well as the hiking trails throughout town. The town also supports the Board of Education, and I will echo the comments of Dr. Freeman and Chairman Bloss. We have, obviously, one of the best school districts in the state of Connecticut, ranked 4th in the state by the latest State Department of Education surveys. I think we ought to be proud of that, and we're proud to continue to support them. Also, we continue to work towards economic development and tourism in a variety of ways and manners. This year, if I could identify the budget objectives and key factors, our intent is to maintain the high level of services despite continued reduction in state funding. We continue to fund our funded pension liabilities at actuarial recommended levels, and you'll see a little bit later that that's a cause of a significant increase this year. We'll continue to provide essential safety and public protection services, including the full-year funding of an additional police officer, which was approved last year, but only engaged for 1/2 a year, as well as 8 new firefighters to serve the North Guilford population in a manner consistent with the service that the balance of the town gets out of the firefighters at the main firehouse at the public safety complex. We are also maintaining the senior tax freeze program at current levels. We are maintaining a capital budget projected funding within the operating budget. We have continued investments in ecological improvements at Lake Quanapog, which I believe is now going to be sort of a reoccurring model in order for us to protect and preserve that wonderful community asset. And we are doing this, this budget is without the reliance on revenues from fund balance. That's a consistent theme that you've heard, I think, now for the last 10 years in the town of Guilford's budgets. This is the bottom line. The town operating budget for 2018-2019, we're asking for $29,716,978, which is an increase of $1,057,979, or a 3.6% increase. I'd take a little editorial comment for my fellow board members. We struggled with this number, and we struggled mightily with it. I think we had 4 different budget meetings after much deliberation. We felt that this is where we needed to be. Debt service is a significant driver in this budget as well, and I do want to indicate that occasionally it's convenient to include the debt service budget in the Board of Selectmen's operating budget. This is obviously not one of those years. However, I think it is important that we understand that the operating budget is distinctly different from the debt service budget, because we made decisions over the past 10 years, 15 years that impact that cannot be impacted by anything we do over the next week. These are obligations that we as a community made and need to continue to fulfill. As you can well imagine, the Board of Selectmen made some reductions to the requests that came to us from the department heads. Some of those were done in a very cooperative and collegial manner with the department heads when it became apparent that we needed to make some cuts. And then there was another round where we went back and said, got to do better. And I'm looking out in the room, and there are a couple of department heads, and you know who you are. Thank you very much for coming back with that second round of cuts. So in total, the board, on the operating budgets, reduced the original request by nearly $1.5 million. And you'll see that our increase, our total increase ask is $1,057,979, or that 3.69%. What we're trying to show here is the where are the pressures coming from? Where are the increases coming from? If you take a look across the top, and it's in salaries and employee benefits. $1,345,876 in new money, based on contracts, based on the obligations that we've made in the negotiations with our employees, including the additional police officer for half a year and the 8 new firefighters. I think a minute ago I just said we're asking for an increase of $1,057,000. So that means there's some areas where we actually cut back. All other operating expenses in this budget were reduced by almost $240,000 and nearly $50,000 in capital from what we spent last year. I think I've been through this a couple of times in terms of the salaries. Current salaries would increase by 3.05% as a result of contracted salary negotiations, step increases, primarily those 2 areas. You can see the net effect of the second half of the hiring of the police officer, as well as the 8 firefighters. It's important to note that those 8 firefighters, the cost of those firefighters are being offset by that grant, the federal grant. And the number you see reflected there is the net number to the town after the grant has been applied. However, there's another component of those 8 firefighters, and that is the employee benefits that go along with it. That number moves from $121,000 to $195,000 when you factor in the employee benefits. So nearly $200,000 in new cost related to the firefighters. To the fire department's credit, they reduced their replacement salary line item by $114,000. Therefore, the net impact this year for those firefighters is $81,000. As we look at the employee benefits category, the second large increase of $745,000, you can see pension plan contributions have gone up dramatically. And that is a result of a change in a set of assumptions on the police pension fund. I think you've heard that before, or at least the Board of Finance has. Retirement sick leave is going down based on less estimated retirements. And medical benefits is an interesting line item. This past year, 2 contracts were settled, one with the GSA and one with the GEA, which included moving to the HSA accounts, HSA health benefit accounts. We are anticipating that based on the experience the Board of Education had when they introduced the HSA model, we're anticipating significant cost containment related to our health benefits. So as you can see, there's a nominal increase in medical benefits. The other category is primarily reserved for personnel. We have 2 unions, the firefighters union, as well as the communications union, which are currently under negotiation, and we have reserved some money there as well. Additionally, there are some significant increases in FICA and also in long-term disability insurance. Let's take a look. The balance of the operating budget increases in some of the other departments. Library under a 1% increase. Golf course 3.77. Park and recreations 1.8. Fire department 0.35, and you can read the rest of the document. Can we go back to police? I want to go back for 1 minute. This is arguably the largest increase I've seen in my tenure, in my involvement on the Board of Finance, and obviously now in this role. And it's primarily along the following lines. Grade or step increases as officers move up in seniority. Staffing shortages. We have been significantly understaffed. We have recruits and candidates in the State Police Academy. However, we still need to, who we are paying, and for whom we still need to replace out in the field. And then the general salary increases. So again, I want to say this is an anomaly. I've never seen the police department's budget increase to this level. There were also some departments that had overall reductions. Board of Selectmen, I won't take credit for this. I think the Board of Finance gets credit for a good portion of that. Last year when they made adjustments to the elected officials' salaries. Engineering Public Works down by 2.12%. Reval, not a big number, but down dramatically. Insurance and Planning and Zoning also down. Planning and Zoning is down primarily because we had our former zoning enforcement officer retire, and her replacement was hired at a lower salary. Okay, our capital budget. Engineering Public Works, as is traditional, commands the lion's share. Second is usually Park and Recreation. And we'll talk a little bit about that. In engineering, there's a 6-wheel dump truck for $236,000. A garage lift for a second garage lift. They only have one, so they can only get one vehicle up to work on the undercarriage at a time. Sidewalks and drainage are part of that, as well as we moved summer road maintenance moved out of summer road maintenance, a line item for reconstruction of old Satcham's Head Road. At Park and Rec, we're looking for a dump truck with a plow. We're replacing a Ford 150. There is money in there for the Adams irrigation at the Little League field, weed control, and the 16-foot mower that's used throughout the spring, summer, and fall as the Park and Rec maintains the playing fields throughout town. Police on capital is a couple of things. One, we have the last payment of technology investment we made 3 years ago. We have 3 police vehicles, which is part of the normal cycle on replacement. And we also have a video server and some tasers that we're purchasing for them as well. At the fire department, this is a relatively small number for fire department, and these are materials that need to be replaced on an annual basis because they have a life they have a life expectancy that will be exceeded and need to be replaced on an annual basis. I think that's far enough on that. One of the things that we've focused on over the last few years is building the capital fund, line item back up to a reasonable level. And we successfully done that since 2012. This year we're taking a little bit of a step back by about $50,000, but we think that keeping it in the $1 million range does a couple of things, including forestalling having to go out to bond for other items, Karen. And what you see, as we have gone slowly upwards with the capital in the operating budget, we have diminished our reliance on going out to bonding for capital projects on the town side. There is a correlation. On the operating side, we are forecasting some cuts based on the state, and this is probably as good a time as any to make the statement on what our assumption sets are on revenue. Last October, the legislature passed a biennial budget. We are using the biennial budget numbers as well as the cuts, the rescissions that the governor made to that budget. So, yes, we have by law the biennial budget, but we think that it's prudent to expect that the governor will try to make or will make the same cuts or rescissions that he made this year. There was some discussion about the governor's budget that he put out recently that called for even greater cuts. I've had extensive conversations with our legislative delegation, and I think the Board of Education has as well, and they say those proposals are dead on arrival in Hartford. So those are the assumption sets that we made with regards to revenues. And I've provided for your review at a later time. This is an eye chart, which I don't think we need to go through. This is the specific estimates for the state revenues. We'll talk briefly about debt service, and I will say this is one community. I have always felt this is one community, one budget. But so many folks have asked, where are the debt service dollars going? And as you can see, a significant portion of them are related to the new high school, which we as a community made a decision to invest in several years ago. The balance are school projects and town bonded projects. At this point, I think I've pretty much gone through what these highlights are. So, Karen, if you wouldn't mind skipping on in the interest of time. Well, let's go to the last, well, not to the last, excuse me. Let's go to where do your tax dollars go, right? Our fire department last year responded to over 3,800 calls. Emergency services, medical services, fires, rescue, dive rescue team. pretty significant portfolio of activity. The police department, almost 12,000 incidents. And by the way, we talked about some kudos to the Board of Education. Our police department is one of only 16 agencies in the state of Connecticut that is accredited by two leading law enforcement certification bureaus, CALEA and POST. And that's something that we should be proud of as well. And I think it was probably demonstrated in the manner in which some unfortunate incidents have occurred in this community over the last couple of months. At the library, 250,000 items were circulated. Over 3,600 people attended a program or used a study room. And I think this number is right, but 100,000 separate computer wireless user accesses during the past year. Pretty significant. 30, how many?
36,000 people attended meetings.
Okay, 36,000 attended meetings. But in terms of computer wireless access users, that is
about
99, close enough. Public Works, 48 miles of square miles of roads to maintain on an annual basis. And by the way, they'll be in at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, getting sand out on the roads, just as they were working around the clock this past weekend on the storm. Park and Recreation has served over 8,000 participants in over 600 classes. They also served 33,467 senior meals last year. 10,780 rides for seniors and the disabled. Social Services assisted over 657 households with programs like the food bank, fuel assistance, renter's rebate, Warm the Children, Back to School, the diaper program. Youth and Family Services, 223 clients, 2,238 participants in education and training programs, and the number you see up there for clinical appointments will grow this year to 2,000. They anticipated to grow to nearly 2,100, or a 25% increase. Assessor and town clerk. I know there's a lot of folks who aren't happy with the assessor, and we're going to be talking about the assessment process and reevaluation in a minute. Town clerk processed over 7,480 deeds, licenses, or certificates, permits, and absentee ballots. Significant amount of work coming out of those departments. That's where your tax dollars go. Those are the services you get. Those are the services we hope to continue to provide to you. Please forgive me if I appear to be lecturing the Board of Finance, but this year is a difficult year from a lot of perspectives, made more difficult by the fact that we have just experienced a revaluation year. The new grand list was produced for 2017 with a reevaluation. For those who have seen it in the paper, there was a drop in the overall value of property in the town in the amount of 3.72% this past year. That makes it extremely different in a reval year to understand the impact of the spending increases that are being proposed to you. It is our intention to help the community understand specifically what that impact is related to your tax bill. So we have developed a calculation tool that will allow people to utilize to entering in their old assessment against the previous mill rate. They'll be able to enter in their new assessment against whatever proposed mill rate the Board of Finance comes up with. And this will give you the difference in your actual tax dollars. So we will be hearing things like 6% increase in the mill rate. That is not a 6% tax increase. We will be able to show on an individualized basis what the impact will be to each and every property owner. This will be on the town website. We have already built the links to the assessors' databases, so the community will have the opportunity to make an evaluation on an individualized basis as to how their taxes are going to be impacted, which is an unusual thing during a reval period. So with that, I think I went over my time, Mike, and I will entertain questions.
Thank you, Matt. So same format. We will, any questions or comments from the public?
Can we turn off the light?
Yeah.
Susan Anderhagen, 200 Landon's Way. Matt, you know I can't not ask a question. I have a few questions, actually. One of my requests would be, if not for this year, at least for next year, it would be nice if some of the information as to where your tax dollars go could have some trend lines and also some baselining against other towns, similar to what the Board of Education team does, because it's very hard to look at those numbers and say, are we doing well, are we not doing well? I think we have an awesome police department, but those numbers of number of calls for the fire department don't mean anything to me in terms of our costs. So I think we really need to baseline against something, or at least look at trends, costs versus calls, that kind of thing. The other thing is similar to what that gentleman said, who I think has left. It's kind of hard not to look at the Board of Selectmen budget and look at department over department over department, and there's a lot more pluses in terms of budget going up than going down. And I worked in a large corporation. I had a $70 million budget in my personal budget, and I can tell you that I never could come in with a budget that was more. It was always less, and what we were always asked to do is tell me if your budget goes down or if your budget stays flat, what can you not do? And it just looks like to me when I look at the budgets of the different departments that everybody just kind of adds a little here, adds a little there. Park and Rec, and I'm sorry to pick on Rick Maynard, but we've picked on him a lot in the disc golf course lately. But the Park and Rec budget looks like it goes up by $28,000, and then he has a land improvement in the capital section of $17,000. And it's just that there's all these departments with pluses. I saw the Board of Selectmen has goes down, the Engineering and Public Works, as you mentioned, goes down, Human Services goes down, P&Z goes down, the insurance goes down, and almost every other department goes up. So I would just ask, do those departments have to answer, what if you stay flat? What will you not do? It just looks like they all kind of feel like they can add a little bit and it will get approved.
Let me answer the second question. I think it was a question, actually. You are right. Many of the departments, they are going up, but if you look closely at the department line items, it is salary related. So the question there is, if the salaries are driving it, are we going to look at reducing the salary line item? And I think most folks are familiar. We have collective bargaining, and we bargain in good faith on contracts, and they are obligated to pay those increases. The answer to your question is, in order to impact many of those departments at this point, it would be salaries or bodies. To your earlier question about trend lines and so forth, and comparisons. I recently entered into an agreement with a company called cleargov.com. Cleargov.com is a small web-based company that does exactly what you just said. It takes statewide reported data on municipal budgets, school budgets, and it provides benchmarking. So we will be able to see Guilford's data benchmarked against other communities of our socioeconomic status, of our population, and this is an attempt to provide exactly what you've just asked. So I encourage some folks out there, take a look at cleargov.com. They're a relatively new company. I think we were the first or maybe the second municipality in the state of Connecticut to sign on with them, and we are in the implementation stage now and are hoping to roll something out prior to the budget referendum. All right.
Good evening. Wendy Furness, 14 Beach Road. I have a question about the new firefighters. And I appreciate what you said about providing more services to the residents of North Guilford. Are those firefighters also trained as medical personnel?
Yes.
They are. Okay. And will an ambulance be housed anywhere other than the public safety complex?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay. Board. Questions to First Selectman and Town Budget?
I don't have a question, but I have a request. Is it possible, will that presentation that you did tonight be available to the board?
You'll have it first thing tomorrow morning.
And then at one particular point in time, there was, I'm not sure we got it this year, an inventory of town vehicles and equipment. Do we still have a spreadsheet that?
Yes, we do.
Could I get a copy of that by Thursday?
On vehicles?
Yeah, vehicles. Yeah.
Yes.
I just have a clarification question.
Okay,
Is that it's quick?
Okay.
The pension contribution, the increase of 17 is just a one-time for the police this
It's
time,
a one.
right?
This represents a correction, basically.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead, Tom. So just start out right away with just some accolades. I mean, we're facing a little bit of a debt wave because I remember we bought a school, little school, a couple years ago, and the town has held off on some capital spending. Maybe it'll be done in the future, but for now, with the debt servicing ratio so high. But it brings up another question about the general fund capital, which you illustrated in your presentation, somewhere around $1 million. This kind of brings me right back to the previous years on the board, and I think maybe we could call this pay-as-you-go to some extent. And, we're highly motivated to avoid interest and pay from the general fund for capital items that don't have a long lifetime, that really aren't that appropriate for bonding. So I understand that, and I can relate to pay-as-you-go and real benefits for the town. But I think I asked the previous administration this every year, when does it level out? When are we've got some kind of schedule to replace equipment, and we know what needs to be in general fund, and we stop seeing it go up. And I know this year you're going to say, hey, it's pretty level, so it is. But you think have we found our level?
I personally would like to keep it between $1 million and $1.2 million. I think at this point that's a comfortable number to keep it at. As I indicated earlier, and I think you all had copies of the 5-year capital plan, we tend to just start moving stuff out. And that's, you'll see, and we will send you the updated capital plan list if you haven't already gotten it. You will get a copy of that, so you can compare that to what you were presented with in December timeframe, and you'll see what's missing. But predominantly what you'll see is it moves to the out years, which swells the out years as well. The needs don't go away. We're just pushing them down in many cases. So, but I think if we keep capital between $1 million and $1.2 million for the foreseeable future, we're pretty comfortable.
Okay.
And again, Jonathan, you also know that there are certain items which make more sense to bond on a bond based on the cost and the expected life.
Agreed. Should I keep going, or should we take a round robin?
Looking to make sure. Just to follow up on Jonathan's point, so if we keep that between $1 million and $1.2 million, would you anticipate that we'd see a continuing decreasing in the amount being bonded, or is that hard to predict?
It's hard to predict. We had some requests. You guys saw the capital plan. Park and Rec is looking for a new 8-bay garage to house their vehicles. And I think the original request was for $80,000 for a facility study, but there was a price tag in there of about $1 million for an 8-bay garage. I think an estimated number. So some of those things I think would be bonded. Right. as opposed to capital.
Thanks.
Is the town anticipating any further cuts from the state this year in this budget?
Ken, I don't think so, but your guess could be as good as mine. I think this board last year made some pretty good estimations of what was going to happen. We had the governor's budget last year, which suggested we would actually pay the state $250,000 when all things were done, said and done. As it turned out, we cut $1 million out of what we had gotten the previous year, and that number turned out to be pretty good. It turned out to be very good with the biennial budget, but after the governor got through with his rescissions, we were short by about $187,000. So we think we're pretty comfortable with projecting what was in the biennial budget and then what the governor cut last year. You should also be aware that there's some legislation pending in Hartford which would eliminate the governor's ability to make rescissions in municipal funding. And you can rest assured that we've already had some conversations with our delegation to ensure that they will support it.
Go ahead, John.
I want to go on to the subject of overtime.
So who do you want me to bring up? Do you want to bring
right.
up Chief Hutchinson or Chief Hershak?
No, don't have to be under the spotlight, but we do have some increases in overtime. Some of them are, double-digit percentage-wise, and obviously, overtime is needed. But do we have some kind of policy that's, tries to at least keep overtime from growing too large?
We do. I think if you're talking, overtime is traditionally in Public Works, Police Department, and Fire Department. And I think this is one of those conversations that it's sort of like Groundhog Day. Every year at budget time, we keep talking about replacement salaries and overtime. Chief, forgive me if I'm wrong, overtime is overtime. When somebody's on a job, a case, they have to stay late, that's what overtime is. And that's an estimate, and I think the chief traditionally uses a 3-year rolling average to determine what his overtime costs are going to be. A similar function at the fire department, overtime is used in that manner as opposed to replacement salaries, which is for when we're downshift. And then Public Works, the only time we use them is Public Works on overtime is when we need them. And if you can tell me how many storms we're going to have next year.
And how many are on a weekend or a holiday?
Yeah, weekends or holidays, which they all seem to be falling at this point.
So I got a little bit of a follow-up question too on the overtime. So I see, the overall spending on overtime, not the increase, but the actual spending is pretty significant. In one of the departments, it's $174,000. Are we at a tipping point where we need to hire, another firefighter, another police officer, so that we don't pay out as much overtime?
Which department are you referring to? Public Works?
Well, I don't want to pick on Chief Hutchinson because I don't want to get a ticket.
I don't think you have. I don't think Chief Hutchinson has $174,000 in overtime. Do you?
The overtime line is 174.
Is it 174? Yeah. Chief, I think you have a staffing complement that is a staffing model that you aspire to.
We have a manpower allocation that we put together in the state, and then we do a workload analysis every month based upon that. And so the manpower allocation is a function of. What do you wave that mic?
He wants you to come up here, I think.
Probably.
No, the mic's not.
Sure. To explain, the manpower allocation is a study that's put together which analyzes calls for service, the response times, numbers of officers, and it determines how many officers are on each shift, and we try to maintain that level as it's a standard business practice in policing, the formulas that we use to determine response times, based on calls for service, and the number of officers that we have. So that's how we do that.
In all fairness, Chief, I see that it's consistent and that it's been a 3-year average. I think is the calculation. Right. But it gets to a point where it grows.
It does,
and it
grows as the salaries increase, and the salaries increase based on the negotiated collective bargaining agreements.
Understood.
So it's pretty close to that.
Also, Chief, what's the turnaround time from when you, unless you're hiring somebody who's an experienced officer?
Which we've been trying to do, and
Right.
not having success.
But hiring an experienced officer, I'm assuming they'd come in at a higher pay grade typically.
Potentially, yeah. Hiring experienced officers come in depending on how many years of service they have somewhere else. So contractually, it could be anywhere from a grade C to a grade A. But if we're hiring a new officer, from the time you initiate the testing process to the time they're on the road is about 1 year. So during that time, we're short that body. So it's 24 weeks at the academy, another 12 with us, and then the testing on top of that to get them in place. So,
thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, the one thing we have not done yet, and I volunteered to do this, but I'll certainly take help from Chairman Bloss or Dr. Freeman if needed, but I think I got this, is the bonding. I just wanted to go over what the bonding questions would be and the projects. I do not have the legalese here. It has not been formed in a bonding question yet that you will see, but I wanted to at least provide a description of what the two projects will be that you will be seeing in the bond. Very simply, it is HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning upgrades at Baldwin Middle School. That is a replacement and upgrade of the systems. I'm reading all the detail here. I'm trying to pare out what is worth putting in here in terms of the description, but the present HVAC systems are original to the building. They have frequent failures. I think we've already addressed that the schools that have the HVAC that's old have been failing. The control system had some minor upgrades, but are no longer controlling properly. An engineering firm was hired to survey the equipment and to come up with costs and a budget, and that total cost is $2,078,314. The other project that would be along with this is the HVAC upgrades at Melissa Jones Elementary School. Ditto. It's the same issues at Melissa Jones, original to the building. Again, engineering firm came in to survey everything and provide a budget, and that total cost is $1,402,427. That being said, that you will see a bonding question, and it was already alluded to in the presentation by the Board of Education, so thank you for that. That number will be $3,690,927. That is going to be the bond question. And I just want to remind everyone, again, that the town will not be asking for any capital bonded in a question this year. Are there any questions or comments regarding the bonding?
I have one.
Go ahead, Ken.
There is a district-wide item in the bonding as well for an additional $210,000. What does that cover? You have a separate bond. The substantial bonds are for Baldwin and less so for Jones, but there's still, in one case, over $2 billion.
District. Oh, I'm sorry.
District-wide.
The district-wide is the architectural and engineering services that would go along with both of those projects.
For these two? Oh.
Yes.
They're for future projects.
They're for future
the
projects.
$210,000 is for HVAC design at Baldwin, Jones, and Cox, which the Board of Education was asked to move forward to this board this year. The board declined, given the debt service issue increases that we saw in the town's presentation. But this will allow us to start doing engineering work on some upgrades that we will be bringing to you in future years. And if I can say, Mr. Chairman, the projects that we are asking to be approved at Baldwin and at Jones are not optional projects. They are not nice-to-have projects. They are projects that have to be done, period. This HVAC is 60 years old. at Jones. It's almost that much at Baldwin, 50. They don't make spare parts for these components anymore. We are spending a lot of money trying to keep them going. It's time to, we got our value out of them. It's time to cut the cord on them and replace them.
But the $210,000, it specifically references Baldwin, Jones, and Cox. So Cox is the only additional building reference.
No, my recollection is, Mr. Gilman, and I'm looking at our budget sheets here, they are for well, no, you're right. It says it's A&E for the additional at Cox, which we took out. We didn't bring you forward a bond this year at
Cox.
At Cox. Now that's going to happen next year, I would guess.
So actually, in summary, we're both right.
Yes, exactly. No, it is
because it does say architecture for future projects, but it also says in the description for present as well.
Correct.
So it covers both.
Right, and the reason is, and we've talked about this in years past, if we can get the A&E done, the architecture and engineering done before the project is actually sent out to bid, then you save a year in the project. And we think that the Cox project is going to need to be done, so we might as well get the design work going on that. And that's basically so we can do it in a much more efficient way.
Right. You get much more solid numbers as well.
Right.
Is Cox HVAC its original as well? Okay.
Yeah, no, and all of our buildings, really, we've now got the two extremes. Adam is, of course, very old. The old part of the building is 1937. The high school is 2 years old. And everybody else is in the either late 50s or 60s. Baldwin is the second newest building in the district. And we really haven't done a lot of upgrades on any of those middle 5 buildings. We're comfortable with staying there. We think they're good buildings. They're solid. It's with any older building, we have to keep them up.
But that also reflects the Board of Education's commitment to staying within the buildings that we have.
We have no intention to bring you any requests for any additional buildings. But if I could mention, though, with Mr. Hoy's presentation about the debt service, those numbers are lower than what we projected they were going to be when the referendum was approved. The interest payments, I think, are a full point less than we had predicted or in that area. And the state reimbursements wound up being exactly what we hoped they were going to be. And so every representation that we made back in 2008 and 2009, in fact, the cost has been under what we represented it was going to be.
I also believe, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I am, but we've also shortened the repayment schedule as well.
Correct. Yes. We predicted that it was going to be a 30-year bond, and in fact, they're now 20-year bonds. We do have debt service increases for the next couple of years, and then they start to drop off, and then eventually they drop off very quickly.
But that means there'll be substantial savings for the town in the long run. We're feeling the pain right now, but
correct.
But in the long run, we're saving a lot more.
No, it saved the way it was structured. And I credit the Board of Finance for this, and I credit Mr. Mazza and the Board of Selectmen, the former Board of Selectmen, for this. It wound up being financed in exactly the right way, in terms of savings, millions of dollars to the town of Guilford.
Thank you.
What I do want to mention, this is a perfect segue. Mary Jane actually has debt service charts that we can receive. We can get them after this. I just found out before the meeting that we would be able to get handouts that show that chart and show that the trending of what the debt service has been doing since we financed it the way that we did. So we'll get those after the meeting.
Can I ask a question to the Board of Ed, but it's more of a, I wished I had thought to ask it earlier. I know you can't talk specifics for the Board of Education, but are you comfortable with the security in light of everything that's happened nationwide lately? Are you comfortable with security in Guilford Public Schools? Are there needs that you're putting off relative to that?
We're going to be talking about this at our board meeting on Monday, actually, but we have had a presentation already from Dr. Freeman, and we're going to be discussing whether there are additional things that we need to do. Having said that, we may not recall this, but as part of the design of the new high school, we actually brought in not only, and this is all post-Sandy Hook, really, we had one set of expectations about what security was going to look like pre-Sandy Hook, and then the project was in the middle of design, and then we decided to stop and really start over again with design of security at the high school. We brought in an outside consultant. The state, as you may recall, set up a task force to make recommendations for infrastructure changes. We have followed the vast majority of the recommendations of the State Infrastructure Council. We followed a significant number of the recommendations of our own outside consultant. And I will say, Chief Hutchison is here. I've worked with Chief Terabile before, Chief Hutchison, and now Chief Hutchison. I cannot begin to explain how committed the Guilford Police Department is to ensuring the safety of our students. They work very closely with the administration, with Dr. Freeman, with the principals. They are in every building every day. We have an SRO, a student resource officer at the high school, who I get rave reviews about. We do have a lot of infrastructure design issues, safeguards, really all of the buildings. We wound up upgrading all of the buildings and the entranceways in particular. It's a struggle. You know, some of the things that we ask teachers to do today are just unimaginable, right? When we were kids, you could have, the thought of arming teachers or the thought of metal detectors it would have been unimaginable. I don't know if we'll ever be completely comfortable because it's crazy, right? But I think we're reasonably comfortable. We believe that the chief and the administration are doing an excellent job. And having said all of that, I think Dr. Freeman has made this point, and I think he's 100% right. The best safety mechanism that we have with respect to our schools is the kids and the parents in the schools helping, raising the red flags, making sure that people are aware. And I think we saw that in the Florida situation. The red flags were there. And I would very much like to believe, and in fact, subjectively and wholeheartedly do believe, that if those kinds of issues were brought to the attention of the Guilford Police Department and the administration of the Guilford Public Schools, the result would have been different. So I want to just encourage people to understand that if there is something that seems unusual, say something, do something, bring it to somebody's attention. Maybe it's nothing, but that's. I know that's kind of a long answer, and it may not be a direct answer. I guess the short answer.
I think it's on people's minds, which is why I wanted to bring it up.
Of course, and we are going to, as I say, we are going to talk more about this at our next meeting. It is something we take very, very seriously, and we understand. We understand why people are
These issues
edging.
arise almost every day. We just had an issue arise in Durham.
Yeah.
Turned out to be a false alarm, but it's
well, there
everywhere.
was something happened at Staples High School in Westport last week, and where actually a fellow student said something, and the police were involved and investigated and acted reasonably, from what I can see. So, I would love to give you complete assurance. I'm
I just
afraid.
want to make sure that we have the resources that we need.
I think that the police department and administration have worked very, very well together. I'm very encouraged by that.
Appreciate the question. Thank you.
Gentlemen, can I just shift back to the medical again? It's it's one of the significant increases, and I know you talked about in your presentation that if you look at some of the long-term things you're doing, you're lower than I think 2 years back. But what is driving the bump this year? Is it experience? Why are we seeing such a large increase in the medical?
Well, it's a large-ish dollar number, but only in the context of not very many increases in the other parts of the budget. So, from a percentage point of view, I think we're at roughly $10 million for health insurance in that area. Yep. So the increase is driven by claims history. It's driven by what our and we're kind of a funny. We're mostly self-insured, but then we have a stop loss policy above a certain number, which has actually wound up making very good economic sense for us. We've wound up saving some significant money from that. But beyond that, what we're trying to predict is we're trying to predict what health costs are going to be 12 months in the future, 14 months in the future, 16 months in the future. We have to rely on what Blue Cross and Blue Shield, our claims administrator, advises us in combination with our outside consultant, Joe Spurgeon, who has given us great data. Now, the good news is that we have been very good. The claims have actually been quite good compared to the budgeted amount for the past couple of years anyway, and you know, there was a time not that long ago that we were running significant deficits in that account, and we have made those up, and we're out of that, and we actually right now have some surplus in that account. So I think Dr. Freeman got an email while we were sitting here from Mr. Spurgeon offering not much hope of any significant change in that line based on the claims history and the expected costs next year. The only positive thing I can tell you is that we think that the HSAs with the high deductible health plans have been good. They've been positive for us, and it does allow us to keep some control that we didn't have before. Beyond that, it's just going to be based on what Blue Cross expects in terms of healthcare inflation.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Would it be fair to say that if, similar to the special education projections versus the actual that you've done, that with health insurance, had you not made a change to the HSA, the increase in the budget would have been larger than the
no question at all.
Cost avoided, if not actual savings.
Because if you just take the last two, if you want to just look at the last 2 years, last year we were able to bring to you a $500,000 decrease. This year it's a $500,000 increase. So the net over the last 2 years is it's been flat. Now, I don't expect it's going to be flat moving forward in the future every 2 years. I think that's unrealistic unless there's some significant reform in the healthcare market, which I'm not seeing right now. So it is a very challenging line, but our unions have been reasonable in negotiating plans that make sense. And yes, if we were at the old POS model, the point of service models, then we would be spending a lot more money.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So although we went a little bit roundabout in the order, I did say something before about that I would provide a summary of the current figures and facts, including some of the comments about the grand list and revaluation. Well, Mr. Hoey, thank you very much for doing what you did up there. Saved me a lot of words, but on several occasions I've been asked, whether it's in the supermarket or just from friends, is there any way that you can kind of do this, grand list revaluation 101 and just provide just a general synopsis of what's happened or what happens? And so I'm going to give it a shot because I wrote notes, and what I want to do is just provide an example. And ultimately what this is going to show, and I want to make sure it's clear for everyone, is that any increase or decrease in grand list ends up simply being a tax neutral item. It does not affect you. Or on average, it does not affect you. And let me give you what I mean. So the grand list was mentioned that it went down, and it went down, the percentage is 3.72%. In grand list, property is broken down into 3 different categories. It's broken down into real estate, personal, and motor vehicles. And a lot of us already know that. 90% is real estate, 3.5% is personal, which is equipment, fixtures, and other things that are fixed, and motor vehicles is 6.5%. Real estate dropped about 4.1%, personal went up about 0.2%, and motor vehicles went up 0.03%. So obviously you can hear that the real estate was really where the drop was. When the grand list drops, the mill rate must go up proportionately. And the reason it does that is to distribute the amount of revenue that must be raised by taxes. So in our case, and it's in our spreadsheets, it's 94%. The average in Connecticut across the board, you could say Hartford all the way to Prospect or Coventry or all the small towns, is 82.5%. And that's a discussion for another day in terms of how much is raised by property tax. We all understand that. The reval that just happened, I think Ms. Troy did a great job in explaining it. It's mandated, and it happened this year as a non-physical revaluation, which simply means it's based on market rates. It's not based on anyone coming out to your house and looking at everything and wanting to come in and see what you've done. It's based simply on market rates. So that was done in October 2017. So I wanted to take an example of an assessed value and an appraised value and just show an example. $325,000 market value home, and you are assessed at 70%, it's $227,500. At the current mill rate today, at 29.36, it's $6,679. Okay, so that's your baseline. If you just take the grand list decline alone, and this would be impossible to do, and I noticed in the spreadsheet it was changed that we have and that we've been playing with, but if you took 0% operating increase and 0% debt service increase, which is impossible to do because we're committed to the debt service, but just that alone, you would have a mill rate that would be at 30.48, which would bring your total taxes to $6,934. That's a difference of $255 for the year. That is a 0% operating and debt service increase. Okay? Now, when a grand list comes out and you get a reval on top of it, the idea behind the reval is simply this. If the grand list goes down 4% and you go down 4% in your assessed value, you see no increase. You see no increase or decrease. It's tax neutral. If the grand list goes up 8% and the mill rate goes down, you don't get a tax savings. You get, if it's whatever the grand list goes up or down, if your assessed property goes up and down by the same percentage, it is simply a tax neutral issue. So I want to go back to what our first selectman said is when there are numbers out there that are saying 6%, 7%, those are not the numbers unless your assessed value is greater or less than what the grand list goes up or down. So if the grand list goes down 4% and you go down 4%, it's tax neutral. And so what we really need to focus on, and what I think this board has been focusing on all along, is what we should, is what the revenues and expenditures are, not what the mill rate number is. Because in a reval year, it fluctuates. I went back before my time on the board, and I don't remember exactly what year it was. Actually, maybe it was the year I was on board. The mill rate actually increased 11%. I think it was in 2012, 13? I don't remember what year it was, but we've seen much greater increases before, and I don't remember there being much of an issue. So I just wanted to make sure that that was very clear regarding how a reval and a grand list together affect taxpayers. So now, what we're looking at on the expenditure side and the revenue side, we've already heard about there's a slight drop in the revenue. That is based on very solid information that we have of about $226,000 on the state side. On the expenditure side, the numbers are, and I'm just going to go through the net change in the town, $1,057,979. That's a net change of 3.69%. Total debt service, we've heard, is $617,620 with a net change percentage of 7.84%. And the Board of Education operating budget, $1,097,039. Percent change is 1.87%. When those are all added up, the expenditure is 2.91% in terms of expenditure increase, debt service, town, and Board of Ed. And I would be remiss to not mention something that I think both the Board of Ed and the town would like to make sure is mentioned, is that, and I'll allow, a little bit of comment. I know we're going to have a lot of discussion probably on Thursday, and we're still going to have questions as a board, but obviously if anybody wants to speak on this board, they may. The operating budgets on the town and the Board of Education side, and Mr. Hoey brought this up, if you take the debt service out of that, the increased operating budget for both comes out to a combined 2.26%. And you could play with numbers, and you could look at numbers any way you'd like to. I have 1 minute. I have 1 minute. We're going to have to change the tape anyway. So, but I'm in a good spot, so I don't want to stop right now. So you could spin the numbers, and you could look at the numbers any way you want, whether you want to compare it to any other baseline. But 2.26 in this budget year, we've been seeing it for the last 4 months, and they're extremely well crafted, and it's going to be some difficult discussions that we may be having over the next couple days. With that, I'll let the tape change. Thank you, Michael.